The water was so cold that my fingers had long since gone numb, yet I kept scrubbing the marble floors as laughter echoed from the great hall above, where 3 princesses had arrived to compete for a crown I would never wear. I did not know then that fate had already chosen me, that golden eyes watched from shadows I could not see, and that before the moon rose full again, a king would kneel at my feet. My name is Elara, and I have been invisible for as long as memory serves. Orphaned at 7 when fever claimed both my parents in the same cruel winter, I was taken in by the castle not out of charity, but necessity. There is always need for hands willing to scrub and carry and disappear into walls when nobility passes. The head housekeeper, a stern woman named Marta who had served 3 generations of royalty, told me on my first day that a good servant is like a shadow. Present when needed, invisible otherwise. Never speak unless spoken to. Never meet the eyes of your betters. Never, under any circumstances, allow yourself to want more than your station permits. I learned these lessons the way children learn to breathe, without thought, without question. I became the best shadow the castle had ever known, moving through corridors like a ghost, leaving no trace of my passage except clean floors and folded linens. The morning the candidates arrived, autumn had painted the forest beyond the castle walls in shades of amber and rust. I was assigned to prepare their chambers in the east wing, where sunlight pooled golden on ancient stone and tapestries depicted hunts from centuries past. 3 princesses from 3 allied packs, each one a daughter of power, each one groomed since birth to become Luna to our Alpha King Kale. The trials of choosing had not been held in 20 years, not since the king's mother passed and left him alone on the throne. Whispers in the servants' quarters said he had refused to choose a mate, that he was waiting for something no one could name. But the realm demanded an heir, the council had grown insistent, and so the most powerful families had sent their finest daughters to compete for his hand. I carried their trunks up endless stairs, my arms burning with the weight of silk and silver and all the trappings of lives I could never imagine living. I arranged their furs and jewels, hung their gowns in wardrobes larger than the room where I slept, and breathed in the scent of perfumes that cost more than I would earn in 10 lifetimes of labor. Lady Vesta of the Northern Peak Pack examined me as one examines a stain on otherwise pristine linen, her copper hair gleaming like burnished metal, her eyes calculating worth in gold and influence. She asked if I was the only servant assigned to her, and when I confirmed it, she sighed as though greatly disappointed by her accommodations. Lady Morgana of the Eastern Valley barely acknowledged my existence, too absorbed in her own reflection to notice the girl who prepared her chambers. She was dark-haired and elegant, with the languid grace of someone who had never known urgency or want, someone for whom the world had always arranged itself according to her desires. But Lady Seren of the Western Shore looked at me with something cold and calculating, a cruelty that needed no words to communicate its intent. She was the most beautiful of the 3, perhaps the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, with silver blonde hair that cascaded down her back like moonlight made solid and eyes like pale winter sky just before a storm. When she smiled at me, it was the way a cat smiles at a mouse it intends to toy with before the kill, savoring the anticipation of suffering yet to come. It was Lady Seren who threw the dress at my feet on the second evening. Pale blue silk, delicate as morning frost, with tiny crystals sewn along the bodice that caught the candlelight like captured stars. The fabric was softer than anything I had ever touched, weightless as a whisper, beautiful beyond anything I had imagined cloth could be. She had worn it once to the welcome feast and declared it ruined because a single thread had come loose at the hem. One thread, barely visible to the naked eye, and she condemned the entire garment as worthless. Flawed, she called it. Trash. Burn it with the kitchen scraps where it belongs. I gathered the fabric in my arms, careful not to let it drag on the floor, and carried it away without a word. But when I reached the furnace room, standing before the hungry flames that would consume this beautiful thing and turn it to ash, I could not bring myself to complete the task. I had never owned anything beautiful. I had never worn anything that was not handed down, patched, worn thin by the bodies of others before it covered mine. I tucked the dress beneath my narrow cot in the servants' quarters, hidden beneath my one spare apron, meaning only to look at it sometimes, to run my fingers over the silk in the dark of night, and remember that beauty existed in the world even if it was not meant for someone like me. I cannot explain what compelled me to put it on that third night. Perhaps loneliness had finally cracked something inside me that had been straining for years. Perhaps the echo of music from the great hall, where another feast celebrated women who would never know hunger or cold or the ache of being no one at all, had stirred some reckless longing I could not suppress. The other servants had gone to watch the festivities from the kitchen doorway, hoping to glimpse the candidates dancing with lords and laughing at witticisms they would repeat to each other for weeks afterward. I was alone in the cramped room I shared with 3 other maids, and the dress lay folded beneath my pillow like a secret too dangerous to keep yet too precious to surrender. I slipped it over my head, hardly daring to breathe. The silk settled against my skin like water, cool and impossibly soft, flowing over my body as though it had been made for me rather than for a princess who had discarded it without a second thought. The loose thread at the hem I had already mended with careful stitches. My needlework, one of the few skills my mother had taught me before the fever took her, before I became an orphan in a castle full of strangers. I stood before the cracked mirror in the servants' corridor, barely breathing, and I saw someone I did not recognize. The dress transformed me. My dark hair, usually pinned severely back to keep it out of my face while I worked, had loosened around my shoulders. My gray eyes, so often downcast to avoid meeting gazes I was not permitted to meet, seemed brighter somehow, reflecting the candlelight like silver coins at the bottom of a wishing well. For one stolen moment, suspended between the person I had always been and someone I could never be, I allowed myself to pretend I was someone who mattered. That was when the head chamberlain found me. He was a thin, nervous man named Aldrich, who managed the castle's formal events with obsessive precision, checking and rechecking his lists until the ink wore thin from the pressure of his fingers. He seized my arm before I could speak, before I could stammer an explanation or beg for mercy, before I could fall to my knees and confess that I was only a servant playing dress-up like a foolish child. "The 4th candidate has finally arrived," he hissed, consulting his papers with frantic eyes. "You are late. The king has been waiting. His grace does not appreciate waiting." And then, before I could form a single word of protest, I was thrust through gilded doors into the great hall, into torchlight and silence and music that stopped mid-note, and the weight of 100 staring faces all turning to look at me. I should have confessed immediately. I should have cried out that there had been a terrible mistake, that I was only a maid, that I had never meant to deceive anyone. But the Alpha King sat upon his throne at the far end of the hall, elevated above the crowd on a dais of black marble, and when his gaze met mine across that vast expanse of polished stone and flickering candlelight, something strange happened. He was younger than I had expected, perhaps 30, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and a face that might have been carved from stone by a sculptor who understood that true beauty requires an edge of danger. But his eyes stopped me cold. They were the color of molten gold, piercing and ancient, filled with an intelligence that seemed to see past my borrowed dress and trembling hands and terrified expression into something deeper, something I did not know existed within myself. He tilted his head slightly, as a wolf does when catching an unexpected scent on the wind. He said nothing. He raised no alarm. He did not order me removed or questioned or thrown into the dungeons for my presumption. And in my terror, my voice abandoned me completely, leaving me mute and frozen in the doorway like a deer caught in torchlight. The 3 true candidates stood in a line before the throne, and I was pushed by Aldrich's insistent hand to stand beside them. Lady Vesta glared at me with undisguised hostility, her copper brows drawing together as she tried to place my face among the noble families she knew. Lady Morgana frowned, equally confused, her dark eyes scanning my dress and my bearing for clues to my identity. Lady Seren's eyes widened for just a moment, recognition flashing across her features, before her expression smoothed into that dangerous smile I had already learned to fear. She knew. She recognized her own discarded dress, the same gown she had thrown at my feet and ordered me to burn. But still she said nothing, and I understood with dawning horror that she was waiting, savoring whatever humiliation she planned to unleash when it would cause me the greatest possible damage. The royal advisor, an elderly man with white hair and a voice like dry leaves skittering across stone, began explaining the trials that would determine which woman was worthy to become Luna. 3 tests, he intoned, each designed to reveal the true nature of the candidate's soul: generosity, courage, and a final trial that would remain secret until the morning it was to be performed. I heard the words as if from a great distance, my heart pounding so loudly I was certain everyone in the hall must hear it. I told myself I would confess after the ceremony. I would find a servant's entrance and slip away, and pray that Marta and Aldrich would take pity on me, that my execution would at least be swift. But then we were escorted to our chambers, and I found myself alone in a room larger than the entire servants' quarters combined. The bed was draped in velvet the color of midnight, piled high with pillows and furs. A fire crackled in the hearth, warming air that smelled of cedar and roses. And I stood in the center of it all, still wearing Lady Seren's blue silk dress, understanding that I had walked into a trap of my own making with no way out. Sleep did not come that night. I paced the length of the chamber, rehearsing confessions that never sounded right, imagining punishments that ranged from exile to execution. But beneath the fear, something else stirred, something I was ashamed to name even in the privacy of my own thoughts. Curiosity, wonder, the treacherous thought that perhaps, just for a day, I could pretend to be someone worthy of this room and this bed and these trials that would determine a kingdom's future. I was still awake when I saw the eyes for the first time. They appeared in the window, 2 points of golden light in the darkness beyond the glass. I stumbled backward, a scream dying in my throat, my heart hammering against my ribs. But when I crept closer to look, pressing my face against the cold glass, there was nothing there. Only the courtyard below, empty and silent under a sliver of moon. I convinced myself I had imagined it, that exhaustion and terror had conjured phantoms from shadow. But as I finally lay down upon the velvet bed, pulling the furs around me like armor, I could not shake the feeling that something had been watching me, something ancient and patient and impossibly vast. The first trial began at the village beyond the castle walls, where the common folk of the pack lived in modest cottages clustered around a central square. Farmers and craftsmen and their families gathered to watch as the candidates assembled, their faces a mixture of curiosity and hope. Each of us was given a chest of resources, food, medicine, and warm cloth for the coming winter, and we were told to distribute these gifts as we saw fit. Our choices would be observed and judged. Lady Vesta moved through the crowd with practiced grace, her copper hair gleaming in the morning light. She bestowed goods upon those who seemed most likely to speak well of her, the village elder whose word carried weight, the merchant whose trade routes might prove useful, the blacksmith who supplied weapons to the guard. Her generosity was calculated, precise, an investment rather than a gift. Lady Morgana gave sparingly and strategically, her dark eyes calculating political advantage with every gesture, ensuring that her charity would be remembered by those with influence while costing her as little as possible. Lady Seren made a performance of charity, her voice ringing with false warmth as she handed out tokens to children while their mothers watched with grateful tears. But I noticed that she gave little of actual value, keeping the finest medicines and warmest furs for show rather than distribution, ensuring that her chest still looked impressively full while others went without. I had no strategy. I did not know how to think like a princess or calculate advantage like a politician. I saw only the faces before me. The mother with hollow cheeks and 3 children clinging to her threadbare skirt, hunger, making their eyes too large for their faces. The old man whose cough rattled like stones in a dry riverbed, illness stealing the breath from his lungs with every passing day. The young girl with a twisted leg who watched the proceedings from the edge of the crowd with resigned hopelessness, knowing that no one would waste resources on someone already broken, someone who could offer nothing in return. I saw myself in every one of them. I saw the hunger I had known in those first years at the castle, before I learned which kitchen scraps could be claimed without punishment. I saw the cold I had survived in winters when there were not enough blankets for all the servants, when I had pressed myself against the kitchen hearth and prayed for spring. I saw the years I had spent believing I deserved nothing, that wanting more than my station permitted was a sin I must never commit. I gave them everything. Every scrap of food went to the families with the most children. Every drop of medicine went to the sick and elderly. Every length of cloth went to those whose clothes were worn thin as paper. When my chest was empty and others still approached with need in their eyes, I removed the warm shawl from my shoulders and wrapped it around a shivering infant held by a mother too proud to ask for help. I did not think about the king watching. I did not think about the trial or the consequences or the confession I still needed to make. I thought only of how easily I could have been any one of these forgotten people, and how I would have wanted someone to see me when the world insisted I was invisible. That night, walking back through the castle corridors to my borrowed chamber, I saw the eyes again. A flash of gold in the darkness of an alcove. The suggestion of white fur at the edge of my vision. I spun around, my breath catching, but the hallway was empty. Only shadows and the distant sound of the other candidates laughing in their rooms, probably mocking the foolish 4th girl who had given away everything, including her own shawl. But I knew what I had seen. Something was watching me. Something was following. And I could not decide if that knowledge terrified me or gave me hope. The second trial came 2 days later. We were led into the forest that bordered the castle, ancient trees rising like pillars to hold up a sky the color of pewter. The advisor explained that a beast had been terrorizing nearby farms, killing livestock and frightening villagers, and each candidate was to confront it alone in a clearing deep within the woods. This would test our courage, our strength, our worthiness to stand beside a king who must protect his people from all threats. Lady Vesta went first, armed with a silver blade provided by the castle guard. We waited at the forest's edge, the other candidates and the nobles who had come to observe, listening to the sounds that drifted back through the trees. Snarling, a scream, then silence, and Lady Vesta emerged pale and shaking, a shallow wound on her arm dripping blood onto the fallen leaves. The beast was too fierce, she declared, her voice trembling. No woman could be expected to defeat such a creature alone. Lady Morgana lasted longer, her warrior training evident in her confident stride as she disappeared into the shadows. But she too retreated eventually, her dark hair tangled with leaves, declaring that the beast was unnatural and that only a fool would engage it in single combat. Lady Seren refused to enter the forest at all. "I am a lady of noble blood," she announced, her pale eyes flashing with contempt. "I will not debase myself by wrestling with wild animals like some common peasant." Then it was my turn. I had no weapon, no training, no courage that I recognized as such. I walked into the trees because I did not know what else to do, and because some part of me wondered if perhaps the beast would end this impossible situation for me. At least then I would not have to confess my deception. At least then the shame would end, and I would simply be gone. Another nameless servant who had reached too high and fallen. I found the creature in a clearing, and my heart shattered at the sight. It was a wolf, massive and dark-furred, larger than any natural creature should be. But its ferocity came from pain, not malice. A hunter's trap had closed around its hind leg, the metal teeth buried deep in flesh that had turned black and swollen with infection. It snarled as I approached, warning me away from its agony, its yellow eyes wild with suffering and fear. I should have run. Any sensible person would have run. Instead, I knelt in the fallen leaves and began to sing. It was a song my mother had sung to me before the fever, a lullaby about moonlight on still water, about the peace that waits beyond pain. I did not know if the wolf could understand me. I only knew that I could not leave it there to suffer, trapped and alone, dying slowly from a wound that cruelty had inflicted and indifference had ignored. Slowly, impossibly, the wolf stopped snarling. It watched me with eyes that held more understanding than any beast should possess. I crept closer, still singing softly, explaining what I needed to do as though the creature could comprehend my words. I found the release mechanism on the trap and pressed until the metal jaws sprang open. Then I tore strips from my petticoat and bound the wounded leg as gently as I could. The wolf licked my palm once, then it limped into darkness and was gone. When I emerged from the forest, the advisor stared as though I had grown a second head. The 3 candidates looked furious, and behind them, in the shadows of the tree line, I glimpsed white fur and golden eyes watching me. When I blinked, there was nothing. The whispers came that night. Servants who had never noticed me appeared with questions about my bloodline. I answered with half-truths, praying my lies would hold. Lady Seren watched me with her smile growing sharper each day, waiting for the perfect moment. That moment came on the morning of the 3rd trial. The court had gathered by the frozen lake. Lady Seren stepped forward before the trial could begin. She had found the laundry maid who recognized my dress. She had found the chamberlain who confirmed his mistake. "This woman is no princess," she declared, voice ringing with triumph. "She is a kitchen servant who scrubs floors. She stole my dress and deceived us all. I demand her execution." The crowd gasped. Guards moved toward me. Every word was true. I had no defense. The king rose from his throne. But before he could speak, I heard a sound that froze my blood. A splash. A scream. A child crying out. I turned and saw the small figure struggling in dark water. A boy, perhaps 5, the son of a servant. He had wandered too close while his mother was distracted. I did not think. I ran. The ice cracked beneath my feet. I heard accusations that I was fleeing justice, but I could see the boy sinking and nothing else mattered. I plunged into the lake. The cold was crushing, the water black as ink. My fingers found cloth. I pulled, dragging his face above the surface, kicking toward shore as cold seeped into my bones and vision blurred. I do not remember reaching the bank, only the burning in my chest, the small body I would not release. When I opened my eyes, I lay on frozen ground, shaking violently. The boy was beside me, coughing but alive, clutched in his mother's arms. And standing before me was a wolf, enormous, fur white as snow, eyes like molten gold, the same eyes from shadows and windows. It stood over me, and as I watched, it began to change. Fur became flesh, paws became hands. The Alpha King Kyle knelt beside me, golden eyes burning. He gathered me into his arms. "The trials were never about lineage," he said, "never about power or politics. I watched each of you from the shadows. I needed to see what you would do when no one was watching." He looked at the noble candidates. One gave only for advantage. One calculated every gesture. One refused to give at all. He turned to me. "But you gave everything. You healed a wounded beast with kindness. And when a child was drowning, you dove into freezing water while running from execution. I was not looking for a princess, Elara. I was looking for a heart worthy of a crown." He faced the court. "This woman will be honored. If she will have me, she will be my Luna." "I am no one," I whispered. "You are everything I need," he replied. He carried me inside, staying through the fever that followed. When I woke, he told me he had known from the first trial, from the moment I gave away my shawl. He had needed to know if my heart was true when everything was taken from me. The ceremony was simple. I wore white, a dress made for me alone. The noble candidates returned to their packs. Lady Seren tried spreading rumors, but no one believed her. I walk these corridors now as their mistress, but I have not forgotten what it was to scrub these floors. I bow to servants who were once my companions. The cook who sneaked me bread now prepares feasts in my honor. Kale's wolf walks beside me at night. He tells me he searched for years for someone whose soul outshone their station. He had almost given up before I walked into his hall wearing a stolen dress. I tell him I still do not understand why I was chosen. Part of me waits to wake scrubbing floors again. He takes my hand. Gold flickers in his eyes. "You were never worthless," he says. "You were waiting for someone to recognize your worth, and I was waiting my entire life to find you. The peace I have now was earned through every cold morning and cruel word. The suffering shaped me into someone capable of compassion, sacrifice, love, expecting nothing in return. Those qualities brought me here, beside this king who saw me when I was invisible. I am Luna now, but I am still Elara, still the orphan who scrubbed floors, still the girl who changed her destiny with a discarded dress. The white wolf guards me still. When the moon rises full, I catch him watching with golden eyes. He sees what he saw from the beginning. Not a princess, not a pawn, just a woman whose heart was worth more than any throne. And that was more than enough.